of this Council on Foreign Relations is meeting and introducing outstanding people in the world. It's quite a pleasure to do so. And part of my job is trying to expand our interest in this Baltimore Council on Foreign Relations and expand our sphere of influence if we have any. And one way of doing it is to get other people, persons, to participate in our program. And fortunately, I have a volunteer this evening to participate with us. And I have the pleasure of introducing the introducer. And this was a request, and I would like to introduce Mr. David G. Ness, who is a career Foreign Service officer in the service of the United States. For many years. He is now retired. He was the charge d'affaires number 2 man in the United States Embassy in Cairo. He's a very close personal friend of our speaker. He's also a close personal friend of President Sadat. Both President Sadat and Mrs. Sadat, before he ascended to the presidency, were the guest of our introducer while in the United States. And as a matter of fact, I heard at the dinner table that Mrs. Ness also taught Mrs. Sadat English. So with that, I would like to introduce Mr. David D. Ness.
Thank you very much. Considerable exaggeration there, but I suppose that's normal on this type of occasion. But honestly, what a pleasure it is to have this chance to introduce to a knowledgeable and interested audience an old friend, a diplomatic colleague, and a man who has the reputation in his own country and in ours of tremendous integrity balanced with diplomatic skill. The two sometimes don't quite go together. Certainly, the historic description of a diplomat as an honest man sent abroad and lied for his country, or to say the nastiest things in the nicest way, does not apply to Ambassador Ghorbal. The fact that his government has chosen him throughout his career to tackle the most difficult, the most sensitive negotiating sessions, culminating most recently with the talks at Camp David and the Blair House, I think is the best indication you have, not only of the confidence his government has in him, but also the trust which our government and the Israeli government has learned to place in it. Now, Ambassador Ghorbal, I've called him doctor for so many years, it's a little difficult for me to catch on to this new title, has spent some 12 years in his 2 assignments in Washington. And during that time, he's visited more than 40 of our states. He's built up a camaraderie and friendship with probably more congressmen, more people in the White House under 4 presidents than any other diplomat that has ever served in our capital. And so I think he probably knows our country as well as most of us, and certainly as I do, as well as representing honestly and accurately his own country. As I've sort of left the diplomatic fray myself and have known him strictly as a friend, I think of him pretty much in those old Victorian terms, a gentleman and a scholar. A scholar certainly, having benefited from both a master's and a PhD at Harvard. A gentleman in that during the darkest days of American-Egyptian relations, in the immediate aftermath of the '67 war, during the war of attrition along the Suez Canal in the 1970s, during the 1973 war. In all these difficult periods, he maintained with his American contacts amazing degree of courtesy, of cooperation, and an infallible optimism and sense of humor. And so with those remarks, which are probably too long, I give you a diplomat of all seasons, the Honorable Ashraf Ghorbal, Ambassador of the Arab Republic of Egypt.
Thank you, David. Those were very lovely words, and I appreciate tremendously that introduction. Forgive me, I can't stand today. I have been suffering from a sciatica that just kills me when I stand for long. So I have asked the organizer of tonight's event to allow me to have a microphone while sitting, and I hope you will forgive me. I recall that a grandnephew of mine saw me standing once and just pulling my aching left leg up and practically standing on one leg, and he said, "Hey Grandpa," that's how he calls me, "why do you do that?" And kids or toddlers always have the why up on their mind. And I said, "I have a sciatica." And he said, "What is that?" And I tried to explain that it's a very painful thing. It hurts. And I took him once to the zoo, and we were in front of the flamingos. And he looked there and pulled my jacket, and he said, "Look, Grandpa, the flamingo must have a sciatica." So maybe we have a flamingo in the family, in the Ghorbal family. But when you think of the years that have passed and the events that have taken place, and since I first came to Washington in 1968, and how the situation was then and how it is today, I say I have been a lucky man to have been appointed to Washington twice, once in the most difficult times and once in the better days. And I always brag that two heads of state of Egypt made life easy for me. Sadat and King Tut, both of them worked hard for me. And I thank them. But I may recall also for your remembrance that when Sadat went to Jerusalem in November 1977, you recall that Prime Minister Begin returned the visit of Sadat and came to Ismailia, right on the canal. And Prime Minister Begin brought a beautiful gift to Sadat. It was nicely wrapped. And Sadat was very anxious to open it. And he opened it, found two ties. And he was wearing that night a turtleneck shirt. So the next day he decided to be nice and warm to Begin. So he wore a regular shirt and put one of the ties. And as he went into the meeting, Begin looked at him and he said, "What's the matter? You don't like the other tie?" Well, that was really the atmosphere, call it, of the first encounters. Still, the suspicions and linger. But now it's all down, and they call each other by their first names. Even though Begin is more formal, and he calls Sadat sometimes Mr. President, but Sadat decided that it's not going to be formal. He's going to call Begin by Menahem, and he continues to do that. I think that when one really looks at the work of the State Department and of the different sections there, and I was there a few days ago, and I told Hal Saunders, the Assistant Secretary of State for Near East and Southeast Asia, I said, Hal, you must be the hardest working man in the department, and your section must be really the most loaded, more than any other. And he concurred, because the area of their work is just overloaded, from the Middle East problem to Iraq-Iran war, to Afghanistan before, to what happened in Mecca, and to other eruptions. I don't say that in order to say that other areas should get heated and thus have an equality, but I say that I hope stability and rationality comes back to the Middle East to get that area to simmer down and to give a little bit of respite to Hal Saunders and all his wonderful colleagues. I say that regardless of what is happening, and of a war still being waged between Iraq and Iran, I still believe that in final analysis, sanity will prevail. It has to. There is no other alternative. The alternative is so dismal that it cannot be. I just mentioned a few eruptions of different magnitude. Just imagine that these get to be multiplied and entangled, bringing in its wake not only more of the countries of the area, and many of them are oil producing and oil exporting, but the superpowers as well. Can you imagine that? What kind of a world will it be? Or will it remain a world? Relations have become so mingled in that area to the degree of confusion, real confusion. I couldn't help but laugh the other day when I read an editorial in the New York Times about 3 weeks ago, as it was describing the mingle of who is helping whom in the Iranian-Iraqi war. You know, it reminded me, and don't forget I've been here since 1946, so I have become in so many ways Americanized. It reminded me of a song, I'm sure my vintage, group of my vintage can still remember it. I married my own grandma. And that's how it looked. Syria is helping Iran, Libya is helping Syria to help Iran, Jordan is helping Iraq, Saudi Arabia is helping Jordan to help I don't know whom, and finally it's getting confused. But again I say sanity must prevail. And we must not only solve the immediate, but principally solve the root. When a body is weak, and that's how I describe it, it starts to have, after a while, eruptions. When the body is strong, it can withstand the infection and indeed the malady. What we need in the Middle East is not what a distinguished foreign minister, the foreign minister of Israel, and some of his colleagues have been saying lately. You see, it is not the Palestinian problem that is erupting war. It's war among Muslims. It's disagreement among Arabs. No, I cannot subscribe to that philosophy. I believe it is a way to run away from meeting the challenge of today. It means, in a way, forget about the Palestinian problem and about solving it and attend to other problems. I was visiting some few weeks back a distinguished senator who told me what really should happen is that freeze for a while the situation in the Middle East and pay attention to the more threatening winds coming from the Soviet Union and its satellites. And I said, forgive me, Senator, you're not making the case. How can you ask people to forget about the fire in their own house and to put out the fire outside in the yard? The first thing to do is to put the fire within and then join hands to put the fire without. And had it not been one of your presidents who said a house divided unto itself cannot meet the challenge from outside. And I say, let us solve all the problems. We cannot afford to pick and choose, some to solve and some to forget. Because those that we try to forget will blow up again on us as they have done before. We cannot forget to solve the Palestinian problem, the core of the Middle East problem. We have to solve it to bring tranquility and stability to an area that lived on a powder keg for 35 years and exploded and in turns because exactly of the philosophy that is being advanced by some today. Look at other problems and close your eyes at one of them. I always recall in these gatherings, like this one tonight, what my professor at Harvard taught me, and a distinguished Israeli, Yusuf Ghorbal, former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. He and I sat at Harvard in the class of 47, learning from William Langer, professor of history. And Langer told us, don't tell me that World War I started at Sarajevo by the crack of a gun barrel. Don't tell me that World War II started when the Germans moved in Sudetenland. Go back to the roots, where it lies, and learn that you must solve the problem at the root to have the tree grow and flourish. These were the words of a wise historian from the United States. And Yusuf Ghorbal and I have now reached the stage where we are, and we have met recently, and he came and had lunch with me, and we remind each other of William Langer and his mottos. For the past year, each one of us in this hall or outside, all over the world, has been rushing every morning to the radio, to the paper and the TV, hoping to hear the awaited news, the release of the hostages in Iran. An action of insanity had taken place nearly a year ago. And regardless of the appeal of the world, these fellow colleagues in diplomacy remain locked up against all norms of law, ethics, and morality. I hope their ordeal is coming close to an end, and that we will soon learn of their release to rejoin their families and celebrate a Christmas of peace and love that they missed last year. If logic becomes the order of behavior and thus of policy, then I dare say Iran should have every reason to release these hostages now. As Egyptians, Arabs, and Muslims, we were distressed to see a war break out between two Muslim brotherly nations. Although we have been called names by each side, because we dare to bring about the beginning of an overall peace in our area, we dread that lives are lost in needless battle between two neighboring nations that can solve their differences at the negotiating table. We were distressed to see the efforts of other Muslim brothers to bring about a ceasefire and the beginning of a solution fail in its mission so far. And we wish ill to no side. On the contrary, we pray for their finding a way to end their conflict. We want in Egypt to see Iran free and prosperous, with its territorial integrity fully respected by friend or foe, by Muslim or communist. We believe that the Tuda party, the Communist Party in Iran, must be waiting impatiently for the day it can take over power in Iran and transform that country into a Soviet satellite. No one must allow this to happen. It would give to the Soviet Union the access to the Gulf that she always dreamed of, with all that this entails of threat to the peace and stability of the area. Nor is the dismemberment of Iran to the advantage of anyone, neighbor or far away. And as we pray for more rationality from Tehran, we pray as well for its well-being. At the same time, Iraq's grievance about Shatt al-Arab and her feeling that she was forced into ceding it under duress in 1975 to Iran must be solved through negotiations by peaceful means. Wisdom, my friend, calls on people to contain explosions instead of exporting revolutions, and to respect the integrity of one's neighbor in order to feel secure in his own lands. Instability, we have seen, breeds instability, and expansion gives birth to hatred and a sense of vengeance. The Middle East has had its share of the agony of these misfortunes. Today it needs to devote its energy to creating the conditions of co-living, of neighborly understanding, and of peaceful solution. David Ness referred to my participation in Camp David, and indeed I was involved last week in the Washington round of talks concerning the Palestinian autonomy. Although a year and a half has passed since the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty was signed, and over 2 years since the Camp David Accords were concluded, the actual implementation of the beginning of the Palestinian solution has unfortunately and unnecessarily dragged on. I'm sure I voice the opinion of many when I state that we had hoped to have seen by now a Palestinian self-governing authority duly elected and discharging its responsibilities in application of full autonomy for the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. We all believed that by now that authority would have replaced, as the Camp David Accords call for, that it would have replaced the Israeli military government and its civilian administration. That by now, political prisoners would have been released and enjoying a life of freedom. That by now, the Palestinians are legislating for themselves, by themselves, of themselves, within the bounds of what Camp David prescribed, namely, not to change the final status of the West Bank and Gaza, which will be left for a final determination after 3 years and not later than 5. We thought by now the Palestinians would be able to breathe more freely, cultivate their land, irrigate it, and develop it, bringing about internal police and order by themselves, educate their children and adjudicate their disputes, all within the realm of peaceful co-living with Israel as their neighbor, and while some Israeli forces remain for the transition period in specific locations in the West Bank and Gaza, to make sure that no insecurity to Israel takes place. That, my friend, was the meaning of Camp David. That is what it called for. That is the true application of full autonomy. And that is how you bring about an understanding between people that need to live as neighbors in peace and in harmony. The transition of 5 years was indeed for the purpose of moving these two nations, the Israeli state and the Palestinian nation, into better understanding, into co-living, and finally into concluded peace. However, you and I unfortunately witnessed the past year and a half being consumed in actions by Israel contrary to the letter and the spirit of Camp David. Settlements were built on Arab land. Families were not united, and on the contrary, mayors who were elected under Israeli occupation rules faced expulsion and still face trial, while other mayors were savagely maimed. Did we Egyptians despair? No. We definitely were deeply distressed, but we persevered in our negotiations. We persevered in our new relationship with Israel, and as friends of Israel, expressed to her honestly and frankly that the path that the Israeli government was following was not only contrary to the letter and spirit of Camp David, but contrary to the very interests of Israel itself in the long run. Month after month, we reminded our Israeli colleagues of the list of 24 measures we proposed to her that she could take on her own to alleviate the tension in the West Bank and Gaza, and encourage the Palestinians to come forward and participate in the deliberations to bring about the agreed upon full autonomy. Instead, again you and I witnessed how the Knesset in Israel ignored the world appeal to withhold any legislation affecting Jerusalem, and we witnessed that unilateral action taking place to complicate an already tense situation. Last week, however, we agreed that we meet again on the 17th of November, the three of us, Israel, the US, and Egypt, to prepare for a trilateral summit that would take place sometime in December or January. But for that summit to succeed, and it must, thorough preparation, I'm sure you agree with me, must take place. Not only do we have to refer to the three heads, Sadat, Carter, and Begin, areas of disagreement, but we have to do our best in the meantime to reconcile some of the differences. Foremost, each one must stop to create any obstacles or establish fait accomplis, or adopt unilateral measures